Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Iowa and New Hampshire are getting all the attention, but there will be a Louisiana presidential primary this March. And depending on how the politics fall, it might be influential. We'll look at presidential politics from the state perspective. We'll also examine a newspaper's investigation into the status of higher education, as well as the new governor being willing to say a word that was seldom heard lately: taxes. Our Future Watch looks at the expanding cruise industry, and we'll learn the 5 most decisive moments from the gubernatorial campaign. On board with us tonight are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, The New Orleans Advocate; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Tyler Bridges, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. We're going to go over to Errol first, because we're hearing so much now about Iowa, New Hampshire, Iowa, New Hampshire, presidential primaries, but Louisiana's up for one too.
You know, what's always amusing to me is that the greatest democracy in the world is still trying to figure out how to elect the delegates who nominate the candidates for president and narrow the process down to 2. And every 4 years there were changes. And this year, most of the activities in the Republican Party. And the Republican Party has wanted to, at least a faction in the Republican Party, has wanted to advance the process a little bit more, and to give the southern states into the mix a little bit more. The reason being is that they're more conservative. So if you can get people piling up delegates in the southern states who are conservative, then that could kind of help in terms of the outcome. So what's going to happen is March 1st, which is a Saturday, there's going to be it's called the Super Tuesday primary.
On Tuesday, yeah. Super Tuesday's on Tuesday, March 1st, right? Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry. It would be. And it has Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and Texas and Virginia. It's also being called laughingly the SEC primary, because except for Virginia, those are all SEC states. Now, there are some other states in there too, but this is where the attention is going to be on those particular states. And so the idea is have them all run at once and people campaigning, and you can get a lot of delegates that they'll come out of that night. Louisiana didn't want to participate in that particular thing. Louisiana, first of all, we have a tradition of Saturday elections. And so Louisiana is going to have its primary on March the 5th. And it's going to be a closed primary, meaning that you can only vote by which party that you're in. And the way the law reads, that the only parties that can select delegates on that day are parties with 400,000 registrants or more, and so that comes down to the Democrats and the Republicans. So only Democrats can vote for Democrats, Republicans can vote for Republicans, which is different from the rest of our elections, which are open primaries in which people cross party lines. But when you're selecting a candidate for a party's nominee, I guess it makes sense. So depending on what happens on that Super Tuesday primary, if there are some cliffhangers, if somebody's starting to show momentum, and then a few days later you have Louisiana. Louisiana could wind up, providing a little bit of a thrust in terms of what's happening.
Expect to have some candidates here for at least several days.
Right, and then at least people be paying attention, and probably while they're campaigning for Super Tuesday, they may as well stop by Louisiana too. Already in this past week, the Trump campaign has been announcing some of the people that are going to be running the campaign locally, and Errol, who is on the Public Service Commission, and Woody Jenkins, who's a former state representative, will be co-chairing that. And so they're starting to build a little bit of an apparatus here.
So we'll be seeing a little bit more action on the presidential level then for campaigning. I know Jeb Bush also has announced a campaign here too, hasn't he? Has he not?
Yeah. And so Jeb Bush is going to probably need Super Tuesday. That might be his last chance.
He may not even be a candidate by that point anymore.
That's true. Well, we're coming close to Iowa, which is the first one, and it's in early February. So we're not too far from finding out a little bit more about what's going on in what has been a rather surprising campaign season, certainly for some folks.
But also keep in mind that Iowa it's caucuses. You know, it's people meeting in people's living rooms. It's not really a primary, but for the media impact it gets, it may as well be a primary. But you have Iowa and then New Hampshire, which would probably be, I guess, the first real primary.
So Louisiana presidential primary after Super Tuesday on a Saturday, March 5th.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. Thanks, Errol. Okay. Now we just continuing to talk about campaigns. We just finished a campaign for governor. You were covering that, and
a surprising one.
And also, yeah, a surprising one. And you came up with what you felt were really some decisive moments in this campaign, and you were going to talk to us about that.
Right, yeah, I'm writing a book on the governor's race along with Jeremy Alford, and perhaps the first decisive moment was February 20th, 2013, when John Bel Edwards, then a very unknown state representative, appeared on a radio show in Baton Rouge and was asked by the host, Jim Angster, so are you running for president? And the question caught John Bel Edwards by surprise. What did I say?
You said president.
Oh, I'm sorry,
yeah, president on the mind.
Sorry.
Governor.
Sorry. So yeah, are you running for governor? And the question caught John Bel Edwards by surprise, and he blurted out, "Yes, I intend to run." And he wasn't supposed to do that.
Hence the inadvertently that we just saw on the screen. He didn't.
Right.
When was he planning to make this official announcement? Do we know?
He was going to wait until the summer after the legislative session that year in 2013.
So he put it out there. So then, what did that cause?
He never had the big formal announcement where the press would show up and there'd be balloons and all that sort of stuff. So he just blurted it out on the radio.
Well, maybe that's something that everybody should do in the future, because it certainly worked for him in the end. Okay, let's take a look at the second point that Tyler has for us right now. Okay, Carter Peterson. By that we mean Karen Carter Peterson.
Yeah, all along, John Bel Edwards faced terrible doubts that he should be the candidate. Remember, for so long, there was, would Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans, get in, the former lieutenant governor? And there was a secret meeting in July of 2015. John Bel Edwards by now is the endorsed candidate of the Democratic Party, but Mary Landrieu and Karen Carter Peterson, who is she's the chair of the Democratic Party, met with him in Kenner and said, "We think you should get out of the race. We don't think you can win. There is a winnable race you ought to run for, and that's Attorney General." And John Bel Edwards said, "No way, I'm in this to win. I do not quit." And he did indeed stay in the race, and we know the outcome of that.
So why did they feel so much that he would not be a candidate to be successful?
Well, they believed the conventional wisdom that everybody had. Remember, by this point, no Democrat had won statewide office since 2008. David Vitter was seen as the heavyweight, and there was really a movement, the ABV movement, anybody but Vitter. And the idea was maybe somebody else would get in the race, maybe John Georges would get in the race, or maybe people would vote for Scott Angel, or Jay Darden, just anybody but Vitter, who looked so strong at that point.
And John Bel Edwards, how well was he known around the state? He hadn't really been in the legislature that terribly long.
Well, he had been in 8 years, and after he announced he was running for governor, he quietly went around the state and spoke before every little Democratic group and Rotary Club around the state. But by July of 2015, when this meeting took place, still not very many people in the state knew him, and very few people gave him a chance to win.
Well, that's what makes your forthcoming book going to be all the more interesting, about how he did actually orchestrate a successful campaign. Let's go to point number 3.
And one of the things that he did is, traditionally a Democrat has had trouble, particularly if they are pro-choice, as Mary Landrieu did when she lost the Senate race in 2014. That was the last Democrat to hold statewide office. But John Bel Edwards is pro-life. His voting record is 100% pro-life, and he could tell that in a speech, but a much more effective was through this ad that he did, which focused on his daughter Samantha, and the commercial focus had John Bel Edwards, his wife Donna, and I'm sure viewers will remember it, talking about the decision that they faced when they were told by the doctor that their child would be born with spina bifida, and they decided to go ahead and have the child anyway. And the ad closed with a shot of Samantha with her fiance. She's getting married in the spring, and it's just a very, very powerful ad, particularly for women. And John Bel jumped up in the polls versus Vitter and the other candidates at that point.
It was a powerful ad. Okay, one other ad, it was also powerful but controversial.
That one came during the runoff. It's the Patriots versus Prostitutes ad. This is a campaign ad that the Edwards campaign had been holding on to kind of secretly. They thought this was the real powerful ad.
Nuclear weapon.
The nuclear weapon, and they had discovered something no one else had, that when David Vitter, it was known that he had gotten phone calls on the floor of the House of Representatives back when he was a member of the House. But what the Edwards campaign discovered, that Mary Patricia Ray was the staffer who did that, I want to give her credit for that, was that same day there had been a vote for to honor Iraqi soldiers who died during the Iraqi war 10 years earlier, and Vitter missed that vote. So on the same day he's taking these phone calls from the prostitute, the escort service on the House floor, he misses that important vote. And so the ad, again, everybody would remember who's seen it, juxtaposed the two, and it was a powerful ad, so much so that it was shown on national TV.
Right, yeah, it made a national splash of patriots versus prostitutes. We go then now to our final point, which of course is?
November 21st, when John Bel Edwards wins the race. Just unimaginable, just even a few months ago, that a Democrat could beat David Vitter, who is seen as so powerful, so effective a campaigner. Right. And again, no Democrat had won statewide office. And the interesting thing also is that the Democrats didn't even do that well in that election cycle, except that John Bel Edwards decisively won that race and now is our governor.
Indeed he did. When is the book coming out? You and Jeremy, who's here often.
Yeah, we're hard at work, so I'd say maybe late summer.
Okay, we'll be looking for it. Thanks a lot, Tyler.
Thank you.
Going over to Gordon right now, and you guys are launching Sunday in the paper and the Advocate, an 8-part series. You said,
Yes.
taking a look at higher education. We're talking public higher education?
Yeah,
okay.
focusing on public higher education.
And so what are you finding?
Well, we're finding a lot of things. It's a sprawling topic, so we're not covering every aspect of it. But the gist of it is that we've gone through, as everyone probably knows, a period of really extensive cuts to higher education, the biggest cuts in the country. And
during the Jindal years.
During the Jindal years, right. And those have been mostly made up through tuition hikes, although not completely. The tuition hikes have caused us to, the overall funding for higher education is down by about 15%, thanks to the rising tuition. So we're looking at that and what kinds of effects that has had. And I mean, one of the major effects is that Louisiana is still a relatively reasonable place to go to college, but not nearly as much as it used to be. And so we've got
in terms of cost.
Yeah. So it's the barriers to paying for college are much higher than they used to be, except if you get a TOPS scholarship, which of course pays for full tuition at a Louisiana university. So what we've got is a system where if you're on TOPS, you're okay. But if you're not on TOPS, which only about 1/3 of the students in Louisiana universities are on TOPS, the rest are having much higher costs, and that's causing them to take on debt. There's a lot of things that flow from this, and I guess the question we're raising is whether this is whether this is sound policy in a state where we're the 48th or 49th least educated state in terms of average educational attainment.
So this cutback of public support for public higher education came on the heels of what had been a focus by the two previous governors of greater support.
Right. Both Mike Foster and Kathleen Blanco, a Republican and a Democrat, were big champions of higher education. Mike Foster helped to create the two-year college system in Louisiana and really pushed to raise funding for higher ed and get it closer to the southern regional average. And we finally reached the southern regional average when Kathleen Blanco was governor. And actually in Jindal's first year we were fine, and then thanks to tax cuts, a bad economy, various other things, we've cut steadily ever since then. And it's been, pretty startling decline.
And how has this impacted then our different institutions, like LSU, the flagship, and now, of course, here, University of New Orleans, has been really suffering? Yeah,
they've all had different impacts. LSU is certainly the best off of any of the universities. The sad part, I guess, for the downside for LSU is they had these real dreams of becoming sort of a University of North Carolina or University of Texas type flagship that was almost like a public Ivy, they call it. They had a whole blueprint drawn up, and that's really been put on the shelf during this time. Other schools, in particular the University of New Orleans and the historically black colleges in Louisiana, of which there are 3, those have really suffered terribly through a variety of impacts. There's higher admission standards, which is sort of a mixed bag. The admission standards historically were very low, and they're higher now, but that's causing enrollment to go down. And with the drop in state aid to these schools, they're much more dependent on enrollment than they ever were. So if their enrollment is down, they're in trouble.
Beyond the fact that the universities have less money, are you able to measure whether the education that the students receive is going down? In other words, that the product is getting worse?
It's very difficult to say that. I mean, there are ways that, there are metrics you can look at, like, for instance, faculty-student ratios are getting higher and higher, things like that aren't really aren't positive. They can be making things better, but it's very hard in this length of time to really show that, like, the product is inferior. I mean, a lot of the people we spoke with during the course of this feel that the product is getting inferior. They feel like the schools are doing as well as they can with what they have, but there's less class choice. There's, students try to sign up for classes and the class is canceled. There's very large classes. There's all kinds of things like that.
Number of graduates, are we seeing that increase?
The graduation rate has been going up over time, and that's a combination of partly of higher admission standards, less people, less unprepared students probably in 4-year schools in particular. We've also seen a big growth in the number of people going to community colleges, which I think is in some ways a positive outcome, although the downside is that there's statistics and studies showing that a lot of people who go to 2-year schools never end up getting a 4-year degree. We also have kind of low graduation rates at those schools.
Well, if graduation rates are going up, can Bobby Jindal argue that this is actually things are working?
I think he could, and I think he will. And
he did. Didn't he say that his focus was?
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed him for this story, and he managed to put a positive spin on all of these things. And, in some ways he says he wishes he didn't have to cut as much as he did, but that he was faced with a lot of difficult budgets. And one of the aspects of this is that so many areas of the Louisiana state budget are marked off for different things. Higher ed tends to be one of the ripest targets when there's not enough money.
And healthcare and those two.
Right.
Okay, Gordon, we'll be looking for it. It starts this Sunday.
Yes.
Okay, through the week. Thanks a lot. Going over to Dawn now and talking about cruise ships. We seem to have a lot of them here.
We do have a lot of them, and according to the port, New Orleans, for the 5th straight year, the year that just ended in 2015, saw a consecutive year of record number of passengers and has twice now exceeded 1 million passengers, cruise ship passengers coming in. And they say that's very, very positive news for the city, because unlike other cruise destinations or places where ports of embarkation and debarkation, in most instances, people who are cruising spend one night at the city they go to get on that ship or get off that ship. In the case of New Orleans, more than 60% of the people coming to get on a ship in New Orleans will spend 2 nights in the city and take 2 vacations in one, and spend more time here. And one of the biggest growing segments of cruising in New Orleans is the riverboat cruises. Viking will start river cruises in 2017. The American Cruise Lines is adding a ship later this year. Those riverboat ships, I'm told, I have never been on one, really cater to a different segment of the population who really are all about absolute luxury. It's a generally older population that has more money, so if they're coming in and spending 2 days, then they're spending more in the city. The Port of New Orleans is looking ahead and is doing work right now in the Poland Avenue area to add a 3rd, what they call state-of-the-art cruise terminal. Right now, they've got state-of-the-art terminals at Arado Street and Julia Street, right in the Warehouse District area. And they will be adding in Poland Avenue probably 3rd quarter or 4th quarter of 2017. They won't reveal who they're talking to, but there is a targeted ship apparently for that cruise terminal in the Bywater area that would hold 4,000 passengers and call New Orleans home, a home port. So the ship is going in and out.
All those people pouring into Bywater?
Well, and what they say is that means business, the economic boom that will happen surrounding that area in the Bywater and some old warehouses.
That's where Bacchanal is.
Right.
It's great Great news for them.
You know, it's a business that has steadily been growing. Pre-Katrina, they were seeing about 700,000 passengers a year in 2004, up to 1 million last year. When Katrina hit, 2005 was supposed to be a year of about 600,000 cruise passengers. It ultimately finished less than that. 2006, a year, you know, after the storm, only just over 100,000 passengers. So it's a business that has really come back to the city and is growing by leaps and bounds. There are ships from the UK that will be calling. This is the season to be calling on New Orleans. There are ships from the United Kingdom that will be making port stops, not home porting, but making, you know, the cruise ship arrives for the day and everybody gets off and spends their money and gets back on.
New Orleans is one of the few cities, maybe the only one I can think of, that you can take boats of two different types in two different directions. You can
Right, and go upriver.
You can take a river cruise, which is one thing, which is a totally different thing, and take an oceanic cruise, which is really the Gulf and the Caribbean.
Right.
So that really makes us a hub, unlike anybody else.
It's the 6th largest cruise port in the country right now, and continuing to
Probably
grow.
number one is Miami, but Miami is all Caribbean cruises, and so Miami doesn't have you can't catch a riverboat in Miami.
No, and you
So-
also don't usually go to Miami and stay for 2 nights. You go to Miami and hop on your ship and get out of
go
there.
off to the Caribbean or wherever you're going. So are locals really taking advantage of having all of these ships here?
You know, it's funny. I can see the cruise ships from my house. I think, Tyler, you can too. And I've never walked down the street to get on a cruise ship. They say about 80% of the passengers cruising from New Orleans are not from New Orleans. So it's not a locally done thing, if only 20% of it.
Well, but I
is
think a lot of
locals.
locals are doing those Caribbean cruises and going to Cozumel.
I have friends who are taking a Disney
They
cruise.
take
They fly
advantage
to
of it.
Miami.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think sooner or later anybody who lives in New Orleans winds up in Cozumel. Okay,
And those people only spend one night in Miami.
Okay, thanks a lot, Don. We're going to go back over to Tyler right now. And as we read at the beginning of the show, we're hearing a word come up that nobody has wanted to say for a very long time. That's taxes. And the governor released what he's going to perhaps propose to do.
Well, yeah, we just talked about the governor's race, and I think whoever was elected was going to have to raise revenue or use the T word, taxes. And John Bel Edwards this past week unveiled what are various options. It's going to be a very, very big hole he has to fill, along with the legislature, a real big budget mess that Governor Jindal and the last legislature have left behind. He unveiled kind of a menu of options. And as he himself said, I don't want to have to do this. This is not something I want to do. There are some spending cuts he's proposing. He's also proposing to take some money out of the rainy day fund, take some money out of a BP settlement, or whether that's allowed is not yet clear.
Well, it's also non-coastal stuff. Let's be clear about that. It's about economic. It's the money for economic losses. So it's a different thing.
Right.
A different pool of money.
And he's proposed to raise the state sales tax. The problem is that he's trying to solve the budget problem for the current fiscal year, which ends June 30th. And so there's not a lot of time, and there's very few options. Remember during the campaign, he and the other candidates all talked about getting rid of business tax exemptions and credits, something that Gordon wrote about terrifically for The Advocate a couple of years ago, about how wasteful they were. But the problem is that in this special session that will be starting on February 14th, there's just not enough time to deal with, there's not enough money that could be generated by dealing within these tax credits.
There's a $700 million shortfall for this fiscal year.
Right.
And if oil prices suddenly went up, some of that would go away, right?
Well, I don't think anybody thinks that's going to happen. But the state is facing a big budget hole, and now it's John Bel Edwards' problem to solve. But I would also make the argument that the Republicans have to own this problem too, because the budgets that were passed under Governor Jindal were by a Republican legislature, and now the Republican legislature, both House and Senate, and I think the Republicans who are saying no taxes, and I've seen some of them said that, and that's fine, but what is their plan? What is their plan to deal with this?
To plug these holes. I mean, the cuts would be severe to try to cover this deficit.
I haven't seen a credible plan that could plug this budget hole without raising taxes.
I like the line that the governor used the other day when he said that port of leadership is ownership. And he says that we have to own this issue. We have to take it. And maybe it's a good thing for him to have a Republican Speaker of the House, because that makes them have to get involved in the issue.
And basically, he's also said that everybody's going to have to pitch in, which means the taxpayer too, to try to alleviate this deficit in some sort of way. All right, we'll be talking about this, I know, for a lot, for weeks to come. We've been talking about it for quite a while, and we're not going to stop talking about it, I know. All right, thanks a lot, Tyler. We're going to quickly now go over to Errol. You wanted to just to take note of a new look in town.
Well, Wednesday was the first edition of the Times-Picayune. That's okay. The Times-Picayune, under its new format, it is now being printed in Mobile. And this was the Wednesday edition. It's a bit narrower. Has a lot of color. There's an essay right here that talks about how it's going to be more visual and more modern, and so they talk about those things. They didn't say that they changed the printers, but this would be the new look for it. One thing that I did notice is that there was a Pelicans game the night before, and that game had ended at 9:15. And, you know, these papers are being trucked in from Mobile now, and so they didn't have a score on this, whereas the Advocate did. And so I think timely is going to be a factor. But, you know, maybe we're moving away from the day of maybe it's a daily newspaper and there's a periodic newspaper that just takes a broader look at issues or something. I don't know.
Well, obviously, things are changing, and more people are going online to read, but a lot of people still want to hold that paper, that newspaper in their hands.
I'm biased. I write for the Advocate. I used to write for the Times-Picayune, but how could you not have the scores for the Pelicans game in the newspaper? It's just, it's incomprehensible to me.
Yeah, I think what they'd say is if you look on the top of the page, they have a reference to their, to their website. And so it's the whole thing. It's the whole thing. What's going to happen? I mean, you know, the people. Yeah, I'm still loyal to reading a newspaper myself. You know, do people want the scores in the newspaper? They expect them, or they just automatically go to the website?
Well, one thing definitely that jumps out to me with this new look for the Times-Picayune, it is much more colorful. Bigger, more colorful pictures. I mean, taking up half the page. Also, the font on the columns, the actual article seems to be a little bit bigger too. It's just a sort of a broader type of layout that it has.
Yeah, it's going to take a few editions to really evaluate it. Yeah. This was the first edition, and there was one that came out today. Okay. But it is different. I mean, it is another step in the changes, for better, for worse, and
and the way we are getting our news.
Yeah.
All right, now we're going to get a little bit more news from you, Errol, right now, and looking ahead.
Well, think about our fellow Louisianians who went to the Washington, D.C. ball this weekend. They are snowed in, and I hope that the bar at the Washington Hilton is
well stocked.
because it's one of the largest hotels in Washington, and it's going to be packed with Louisianians who can't go outside.
I know, okay, they're going to want to eat and drink. I hope they load it up with a lot of food and a lot of booze. Okay, Gordon.
Well, we should have a decision on the Confederate monument case shortly, I would expect, and based on what the federal judge overseeing this last-ditch effort to stop the removal, I'd expect him to clear the way for it. Yeah. I guess the question is whether anyone's going to want the contract after the last contractor's Lamborghini ended up as a pile of molten rubber and metal.
Okay, Gordon, thanks.
At the Sundance Film Festival this weekend, the film Gleason is debuting, and I think there'll be a lot of talk about Steve Gleason and ALS in his life coming forward.
A powerful film. Tyler.
Yeah, with the release of Governor Edwards' tax proposals, I think in the coming week, let's watch to see the different responses, again, specifically from the Republicans, because they control both the House and the Senate, and they traditionally do not want to raise taxes. All right, so what is their plan going to be?
Okay. All right, I thank you guys for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.